was ripping down the power lines, going from county to county, and second gear decided it wanted to weld itself to the shaft while he was ripping in a wheelie. Yep, they don't like long periods of time at high RPMs. Seems the shaft spit all the oil out between the little bushings, and the gear's going to weld itself to the shaft. That will absolutely shit whip you into the ground. This dude got lucky. It whipped him into the gas tank instead of off the bike, so he really didn't get hurt. Surprisingly, the engine didn't really get hurt that bad either, aside from the chipped gears on the one second gear. So this video is going to be a rip down, put back together, throw back in the bike, ride, diagnose some more, because after we got it back together, it had some real interesting sounds. These aftermarket parts that you guys get for these, some of them can bite you in the butt. They'll make all kinds of weird sounds. You'll think the motor's falling apart, and it's not the motor, it's the little cover that you put on that's just dinging along. You'll know what I mean when you watch the video, when ride videos come up and you hear that little ding, 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 ding. Yeah, I'll show you what that is. And boy, I did not expect that whatsoever. We were chasing our tail for a while trying to figure out what was going on. Now, this is a basic rip down. I mean, there's not much difference between the YFZ motors, fuel injected or not fuel injected. Basic rip down, pull it all apart, pull all the pieces off. Break out the T-handles. I don't have any specialty tools. The only special tool I have for this bike is the flywheel puller. Luckily, the flywheel puller for the YFZs does cross to all the years. I had no 06 that I use it on, and this is a 2021. So, yeah. Bonus. One tool, multiple applications, saves you good pennies. A lot of high speeds, some quick clips. Get all this stuff apart. Like I said, it's pretty typical. You rip it down until you find the broken components, put it back together. Stators are always fun because the flywheel likes to hold on to the stator, so you sometimes got to fight with that a little bit. Pull all the pieces out. You put the pieces back where they came from, any other component. That way you don't lose anything. And as you'll see through this whole breakdown, just this one special tool is all I use for splitting cases. I've got an old school technique that was showed to me by one of my first bosses. It's worked for 30 years. Can't complain. You'll see how that's done here in a minute. I'm going to pull the flywheel off. When you pull the flywheel off, you've got to hold on to the one-way gear on the back. That way it stays, because some of those fall off. It is bolted on, but there's bushings and stuff like that in there too. Get in there, pull all the cam caps off. Make sure it's on top dead center so that there's no pressure on the cams or the valves. You don't want these things popping up. I've seen cam caps snap because you go to loosen them and the cam pops up. They don't flex very well. They're thin cast. Fight with the cam chain a little bit. Let it fall down. Doesn't matter. It's all coming apart. Get in there with a gun if you can. These EPA hoses get in the way. It's a good idea to get those things out of the way in the first place. That way you're not fighting with them later. This is the first time I've been into one of these new motors, so it's a learning experience to a point. Most 450s are pretty similar across the board. Granted, KTM's got their own cam design and how they drive the cams, which I like the KTM designs where they're just dropping cams with gears a lot better than trying to time a chain. But it is what it is. This is Yamaha. This is the way their engineers built it, and so you work with what you got. Head came off of the cylinder. That was kind of neat. You can check the cross hatches. This engine's got 75 hours on it. Cross hatches in this thing are absolutely gorgeous. For the amount of time that this motor has, it does not look like it's got that many hours on it. 75 hours, still looks good. Cross hatches are beautiful. No nicks, no dings, no nothing. Well maintained. Not going to complain about it whatsoever. A little bit of carbon on the piston, but again, it's 75 hours on pump gas. This quad has made it to the track a few times. It's been on my track a couple of times, so there's a couple of videos of it on the channel running around. Trying to put all the pieces back on the head so that we don't lose anything. There's a lock washer on the counterbalancer. You knock that little lock tab over. Screwdriver's got a V cut in it. It's not a regular flathead anymore. It's my little lock washer undoer. Once you get the lock washers flat, get on there with a gun, zip everything off. This is not an I'm going to be nice to things. This is it needs to come apart so that we can figure out what's broken and get it back together. At this point in time, I still have no idea what's going on. It had rolled for me. It did not roll for the guys. So at this point, I'm still wondering what's broke. I don't see anything obvious. People said a lot about the clutches blowing apart. I have yet to see a service bulletin or anything from Yamaha to say why the clutches blow apart or if they even blow apart or what the fix is. Now, you go on the forums, they say you put an older clutch basket in it and it fixes the problem. On Tony's 2023, we put a Hinson basket in it. Not going to worry about it. Those little rubber bumpers I can see being problematic. But again, until I see a service bulletin from Yamaha, I'm just thinking that some people don't know how to ride or they got faulty products. Either way, there's a fix for it. Put an older basket in it. Get an aftermarket basket. Get rid of this 3-bolt basket. As you can see, I was pulling on it, trying to get the whole basket out. There's a washer in there. It is a splined washer. If it does not line up with the splines, it doesn't come off. See the splines? So you can't, like some of the older bikes, you can't just grab onto the basket and pull the whole assembly off in one shot. Splines don't line up, that basket's not coming out. Turn around, we put all the plates and everything back in the basket, so again, nothing gets lost. This set of plates is interesting because it's got a skinny plate that goes on first, standard plates that stack in, and then it's got 2 more skinny plates that go on top. So the order of those clutch plates is critical. 1 skinny, standards, 2 skinnies. Get the drive gears off the crank. Put them in the bucket. Oil pump drive gear. Little C-clip. There's a washer that goes on top. There is no washer that goes on the backside. Around, all the shift linkage, all this stuff's going in a bag. The little bitty springs and plungers and washers and all that stuff all can get lost. You lose one piece, you're done for. You're ordering parts and waiting. So put everything in a bag so nothing gets lost. Continue on the disassembly. All of the case bolts to split it are on the ignition side. So get on there, zip them all loose. Yes, I'm using an Allen wrench, an extension, and a 10mm for a cheater bar. Let the comments flow. No, I do not do things the standard way. I've kind of got my own way. I've been doing this a long time. And no, it's not typical. A lot of things by hand, some things by power tools. It really depends on what I've got around. Easy to grab. Pull all the timing chain pieces off. Lots of little stuff. Get the chain out the way. That goes in the bag. That is the shift rod and shift ball. That goes through the motor and the input shaft. That's what opens and closes your clutch. That is directional. The big end goes in last. Little end in the shaft first. Ball, and then the plunger for the clutch basket itself. If you forget either of those parts, your clutch isn't going to work. one of the conversations I've been having with people is the differences between riding styles. You've got motocross, you've got enduro, you've got street riding, you've got general riding. How do the different riding styles affect the engine? Well, with some thought and some talking to other people, and here we go. I've got the screws in there, and we're just whacking cases, trying to get those things to pop. As soon as you get the cases to split a little bit, take the screws out, and you can get them apart. Sometimes you got to finagle it a little bit. Sometimes the crank gets stuck in the crank bearings. But, yep, a couple of whacks here and there. Make sure that you get the separation right, and you can slide it all apart. Let it all come apart the way it wants to. Now, back to the riding styles, though. Motocross is a lot of full throttle, half throttle, hard jumps, hard landings. When people are landing, they're landing on the gas. The transmission and motor are going through extremes of spinning and stopping and spinning and stopping. It's making the gears clash really hard. Street racing, street riding, all that kind of stuff is a lot easier on the transmission in the means of you're not clacking gears back and forth on hard landings, but you are doing higher speeds on two wheels most of the time, and that affects the gears differently because you're not getting the lube that you need. There you go. That's the two pieces of gear, or one piece of gear. It fell out the transmission as we split the cases. The next piece is kind of jammed up in there. That comes out in a minute. Pull the shift forks out. Shift forks are all good. There's no rub marks on the shift forks. The shafts are all good. The shift drum was all good. The input shaft looked really well. You couldn't tell that it sheared 2.5 gears off of the output shaft. There's the two pieces. I'll pull these things apart. Make sure everything looks okay. Do some roll inspections and see if everything's moving like it's supposed to. This is where I find out that second gear is welded to the shaft because it's the only gear on the shaft that's not spinning, and it's supposed to be spinning. All right, back to transmission abuse and engine abuse and their different riding styles. The enduro racing is kind of like woods riding, except a little bit faster paced. The motor's going a lot of various RPMs. It doesn't stay at any one RPM for long periods of time. There's lots of ups and downs. Yes, there's full throttles, but there's also a lot of no throttles. You've got hill climbs, you've got descents. There's all kinds of different environments for the transmission to have to go through, but it's not like the motocross where you're smashing a wide open throttle into the ground. So I would say that enduro racing is probably the easiest on the motor when it comes to physical abuse, but the times that you're running in the enduros is what really gets the motors. Road riding is kind of like enduros because you've got a lot of time on the motors and you've got the high RPMs with the road riding. So the high RPMs are slinging the oil off the shafts, which is making the bushings get hot, and this is how we weld gears to shafts like this, and you end up with shattered teeth like that. This is mainly from road riding. This bike spent its time going from county to county. 75 hours, mostly 3/4 throttle to wide open for long periods of time. It's basically a road riding motor. It had a couple of motocross experiences, but the engine itself is solid. The transmission, we got a new used shaft for it, so we put that in. Worked out really well. We did have a ding-ding situation where we were chasing sounds that were coming from aftermarket parts. That's still to be seen in the ride video, which is at the end of this one. We'll get everything all cleaned up. Transmission's back in it. Put the Yamabond on the old finger. Do the finger trick to get the goop onto the case halves. I always wipe all the oil off. I try and make sure all these surfaces are as clean as possible. And then just put a thin layer of Yamabond on it. Put it together. So yeah, tell me what you think about these different riding styles and how they affect the engines and the abuse that the engines have to go through on these riding styles. It's kind of a neat little side conversation. Want to know your opinions on it. See what you have to say. Do you agree? Motocross is probably the hardest when it comes to hitting the transmission hard. Although your ride time's not that long on a motocross track. You're not doing miles and miles and miles at a time. But boy, are you wide open most of the time. Let me know what you guys think about these high-speed time-lapse kind of videos too. Do you like the full go-throughs, take it apart, put it back together, put it in the bike and ride? You want me to break them up into multiple different videos so you got the opportunity to watch pieces and parts of it? That way, in case you're trying to build one of these engines, you can kind of follow along. And if you get tripped up, you've got something to watch to see what's going on. I did make a couple of mistakes when I was putting this thing together. After we got it in, I had to take a couple of washers out that were binding things up. Hopefully on the assembly process, I can point out these washers. That way you guys make sure you don't do the same thing I did. This is the first time being into one of these things, so mistakes happen. I am human. I am not perfect by any means. I will definitely be the first one to admit that, but I get the job done, and most people are happy. Some people don't get happy, and they put me on blast, but hey, is what it is. Without the haters, you can't have the lovers. So if you got the people that like you, you stick with those people and you keep them around you. The haters, well, they can come and go, and if they get too annoying, you just block them and you don't have to worry about them anymore. If they love you so much that they got to make another account so that they come back and harass you some more, well, just smile, because they might not like you, but boy, are they putting the effort in. When you drop these clutch baskets in, you got to make sure all the gears are lined up. The oil pump gear only has a small, the idler gear that runs the oil pump. Sorry, not the actual gear, but the gear that's in between the clutch basket and the oil pump. That has a very thin washer and a C-clip that holds it in place, and they stay on the outside of the gear. That thing kind of rattles around freely. That way, when you're screaming at high RPM, it gets the lube. We got my little clutch hack here. Put your pressure on the clutch plates. Hit it with the hammers. It's got a lock tab on it. Fold that lock tab over. That nut is not coming off. Put your little clutch plunger in there. The plates. There's little rubber dampeners in there. Make sure they're all facing the same way. Make sure everything sits down flat. Those little rubber bumpers I can definitely see being problematic. But hey, this is a factory clutch. It is what it is. People are saying these are what you replace. 3 screws with a big round plate. That holds everything together. I hold that T-handle right in the middle. We don't torque those things really hard at all because you will snap those ears off. I don't know how many baskets I've seen with snapped ears because people go crazy with them. Crank down that other nut. Put your dots together for your balancer. Pushing the balancer up from the backside. Put the nut on. It's got a lock washer on it also. Hammer that down, flip the washer over, lock down. Clutch side is together. This is a neat little wrench trick that I figured out a few years ago. For the longest time I fought with those things, but I saw this one day and was like, you know, that works a lot better. You don't have to worry about breaking anything. Put the timing chain back in. There's a little metal guide that goes in the chain guide. You got to make sure that little dowel is in there so it takes up the space and the guide doesn't rattle around. Put that in there. Put the little metal plate in there. There's a peg on the plate. You put the peg through the hole, screw it all down. Put the key in, flywheel, starter gears. Crank the flywheel down. Nice pretty new gasket. Careful with the cover, because as soon as you put that near the magnets, it wants to suck that thing right down. So make sure everything is lined up, and it should slide on really nicely. Nice new gasket for the other aftermarket cover. This is a higher volume cover, so we need to make sure to add more oil. OEM spec says like 1.6, 1.7 quarts. It's almost a 2-quarter with that thing in there. The clutch cover also has an inspection glass cover on that side, so that's another extra volume. There's the roller. Give you guys a little teaser. It is a pretty bike, that's for sure. Typical 4-stroke. Take your fingers, squish the rings together. Make sure the ring end gaps are 180 degrees off of each other. Slide it all together. Make sure the timing chain's not bound up in the flywheel so you don't have to take it apart 3 times. Yes, that happened twice. So once you get the timing chain out, everything all lined up, all your dowels and pegs in the right place, slide it all together nicely. Nice new gaskets. Slide the head on there. It is nice having an extra set of hands. Had a double dowel moment. And then I throw one cam on there, that way you can kind of hang the timing chain off of it. You don't have to worry about it falling back in the hole. Get everything all down snug. That way you can make sure everything's all good. Crank it all down nice and tight. "35 years of building motors, I don't think I've ever put a torque wrench on a motorcycle engine." The timing on this thing, you find the T, it looks kind of like an H the way that they've got it marked. Make the cams face away from each other. There is timing dots on the cam gears. Put the dots level with the head. That's me making sure that it's at top dead center because this old man's going blind. Find top dead center. I should have just had Tony look and find it. Put the bearing stays on the bearings. Get the caps all set. Put the gears in place. Make sure it's all timed correctly. That way you don't have to go back and move both gears over one tooth. We were having starting issues with it. I put a washer behind the oil pump gear to kind of snug it up. That was a bad idea. That bound that up. Put a washer behind one of the starter gears. That bound that up, so it didn't want to turn over. So, yeah. If at all you have a question about assembly, go to Partzilla, look at the microfiche. It'll show you what's where. That way you know if you're putting it together correctly or not. The timing chain tensioner on these things is pretty neat also because you put a little flathead screwdriver in there, you back it all the way in, you back it back to the point where it clicks and it'll hold itself. So you put it in, it stays retracted, you can set the timing and everything. Once you got it all set, you give it a little bump with the screwdriver, it automatically threads itself out, tightens the chain up, roll the motor over a couple of times, takes the slack out the chain, and you're golden. I really do like these 450 engine designs. They're based off of the Formula 1 engine. It's got a little pancake piston on them. Those things are light as can be. These engines will wrap up 14 grand. They sound really cool when they're wide open. Almost kind of wonder if they're going to blow apart, but they never do. And it's just mad power. These things pull like absolute mules. And I really, really enjoy riding these 450 engines. These engineers know what they're doing when they design those things, that's for sure. The power delivery, the RPM, the speed and how fast they rev, they're just a lot of fun to ride. Not too fond of the big bores, 500s and stuff like that. When you go from the 450 to the 500s, I have seen some 500s grenade. It seems like the big bore kits put a little bit of extra strain on things. So you got to be careful on the company and manufacturers of the kits that you get for the big bores, because if you go cheap, you might end up replacing your top end sooner than later. And these top ends are expensive to rebuild. So here we go. She's all back together. We're going to get you some ride videos. Listen to these ride videos. They have some strange sounds in them, and it all boils down to the front sprocket cover. We'll get you a good picture of that front sprocket cover here coming up. I'm going to be quiet here so you guys can listen to the sounds. Tell me what you hear. Tell me what you think. And, yeah, down in the comments, let me know. Minute reminder, if you've made it this far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you haven't hit that like button, smash that like button. Throw a comment in there. I'll see you in the next one. Appreciate it a bunch, everybody. Have a good one.